My name is Grace Thompson. I am 70 years old, and that night, something inside me shifted. I had spent so many years quietly giving, quietly bending, thinking that keeping peace meant love. I remember standing in my dining room, the aroma of vanilla pudding filling the air, the crystal glasses gleaming under the soft light. Everything had been arranged just so. Each fork polished, each chair pushed in. I wanted one perfect evening, one night where I could feel like I mattered. But then I saw her, in her red dress that seemed to glow with intent. My daughter-in-law, Amanda, moving across the room like she owned it all. Her eyes sharp, calculating. My son, Michael, sat across from me, pretending not to notice the tension, fingers tapping nervously against his phone. I felt a wave of heat rise, a mix of fear and frustration. The words hit me even before she spoke, slicing the air with ease. I froze, a serving spoon in my hand, my heart pounding. I remembered every sacrifice I had made for them. Every night I had stayed awake, nursing my own son through fevers. Every penny saved and quietly handed over to keep them afloat. And now, here I was, feeling invisible, like all those years had vanished in a single cruel glance. My mind raced. Should I cry? Should I shout? Should I retreat into silence as I had so many times before? And then, strangely, calmness settled over me. I reminded myself of all the months I had quietly shouldered their rent, the $1,000 I had faithfully sent every month, the meals I had skipped, the corners I had cut in my own life to give them comfort they didn't even recognize. I realized in that instant that I held the truth, the one piece of power that had been mine all along. For a moment, the room felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were pressing in. But I had a choice now, and I could feel it. I could continue to be invisible, or I could speak the truth and reclaim the dignity that had been silently stripped from me for too long. The air shimmered with anticipation, and I knew that everything would change before the night was over. I wondered how long I had been invisible in their eyes. How many times had I swallowed my own voice to protect their pride? Their comfort. I thought about the quiet satisfaction that was about to come, the revelation that would shift the balance. And in that moment, I knew I had to act not in anger, not in revenge, but with steady courage and clarity. I placed the spoon carefully on the table and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 30 years of patience and sacrifice settle into a still, unshakable resolve. Tonight, I would no longer be invisible. Tonight, they would finally see me. And as I prepared to reveal what I had carried silently for months, I felt a strange thrill. It was the thrill of reclaiming my own life, of stepping out of the shadows I had allowed them to cast. Little did they know, the truth I held would turn everything upside down, and for the first time in decades, the power in this room was mine. I looked at the red dress, the poised smile, and the distracted eyes of my son. I reminded myself that what I was about to do was not cruel, it was necessary. And in that quiet, tense pause, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. I was ready. I thought I had lived a quiet, ordinary life, but looking back, it was filled with little acts of love that no one noticed. I spent decades raising my son, Daniel, alone, sewing and hemming, patching clothes, and mending not just garments, but hearts. Each stitch carried a memory. each quilt square a story of nights spent awake worrying over scraped knees or missed homework. I often believed that giving my all for my family was enough, that it was what love looked like. When Daniel first came to me, desperate and ashamed, telling me he had lost his job and couldn't pay his rent, my heart didn't hesitate. I opened my savings account, the money I had gathered penny by penny over decades, and quietly began sending $1,000 each month. I reminded myself to keep it secret from Amanda, to preserve her pride, never realizing I was erasing pieces of myself with every payment. I cut corners, stretched meals, even rationed my medicine. I didn't see it as sacrifice. I told myself it was love. Meanwhile, Daniel and Amanda lived freely, taking weekend trips, buying new clothes, enjoying dinners I couldn't afford to attend. And I carried it all silently, believing that one day they would recognize my efforts, that they would feel gratitude instead of entitlement. I wanted them to see my love without needing to demand acknowledgement. My home, the one I had built with years of care and memories, became a stage for this quiet suffering. The rocking chair where I had comforted my son through storms, the quilt stitched from leftover fabrics every corner, held proof of the life I had given, the patience I had nurtured, the hope I had carried. And still, I believed I was invisible only to myself. As I prepared for that dinner, I reflected on all the times I had swallowed my own voice to avoid conflict, all the meals I had cooked with aching hands, all the nights I had let worry twist inside me while they slept peacefully. I wondered, silently, how it had come to this, that the people I loved most could treat me with such casual disregard, never noticing the cost of their comfort. I thought about the dreams I had put aside, the little joys I had postponed trips, quiet afternoons reading, even new shoes, because every resource was directed toward keeping them afloat. And yet, in the quiet moments, I never questioned the choice. I believed I was nurturing something eternal, a bond that would outlast mistakes, misunderstandings, even insults. And then I reminded myself that no matter how much love I poured into others, love without boundaries can become a cage. I felt the weight of those months, the quiet exhaustion, but also a strange surge of clarity. This dinner was not just another night of polite conversation. It was the night I would no longer be invisible, the night I would reclaim the dignity that had been silently stripped away. I arranged the table carefully, not just for appearances, but as a kind of meditation, each plate and glass reflecting the patience, the care, and the love I had carried for years. I allowed myself a moment to breathe, to feel the memories embedded in the walls, to acknowledge that I had been strong enough to endure months of quiet sacrifice. And as I looked at the empty chairs, imagining the confrontation that awaited, I felt something stirring deep inside, a sense of readiness, a courage that had been building silently alongside my love. For the first time in a long while, I knew I could hold the truth, and in holding it, I could finally release myself. The evening began with the familiar mixture of hope and dread. I had prepared Daniel's favorite meal, setting the table with the crystal glasses and silverware that had been in our family for generations. Every detail carried a memory, a gesture of love that I hoped might soften the night. But from the moment Amanda arrived in her red dress, perfectly styled, I sensed the storm gathering. There was a confidence in her step, a subtle arrogance in her smile that made the air feel heavier. I could see Michael shifting nervously, avoiding my gaze, as if he already knew the tension that was about to unfold. As we began the meal, I felt the familiar sting of judgment, Amanda pointing out how cold the food was or how outdated the room felt. I reminded myself to stay calm, to breathe slowly, to let the words slide like water off a stone. For a long moment, I allowed myself to picture the little boy Daniel had been, sitting at this very table, scraping his plate clean, his eyes wide with delight at the meals I had made for him. I wondered if he even remembered those days, or if the image of a perfect, modern home had replaced every memory of warmth. My thoughts drifted to the months I had sacrificed silently, covering their rent, stretching my own resources to make sure they had comfort, safety, and freedom. The truth was mine, and yet it had been buried under a layer of lies and indifference. I felt a quiet anger rise within me, not the explosive kind, but the steady, resolute kind that comes from holding the knowledge of one's own power. I realized then that everything in this room was about to be upended, that I held a secret that could change the dynamic completely. I let my hands rest on the table, feeling the weight of every unpaid moment, every sleepless night, every small denial I had accepted to keep them afloat. It was strange how invisible I had felt, even in my own home, even in my own life, and yet here I was, holding the one truth that could no longer be ignored. The tension built with each passing minute, the polite conversation around us fading into background noise. I could feel my heart racing in anticipation, but my voice remained steady, my resolve firm. I reflected on all the times I had swallowed my words to protect their pride, how I had hidden my exhaustion, my sacrifices, my very self in the name of love. And now, the moment had come to decide whether I would continue to be silent or to reclaim the space that had been quietly stolen from me. I reminded myself that speaking up was not about revenge. It was about boundaries, respect, and recognition. I felt the clarity sharpen within me as I prepared to reveal what they could never have guessed, that I had been paying their rent all along, that every convenience they had enjoyed had been built on my quiet, unseen labor. And as I lifted my hands from the table, letting the memory of every month's payment settle into my awareness, I felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The air seemed to shift around us. Amanda's poised confidence and Michael's avoidance could no longer shield them from the truth. I knew that once I spoke, nothing would be the same, and for the first time in a long while, I felt ready. The room, the food, the careful arrangement of memories, it was all a stage for what was about to unfold. And in that quiet, charged moment, I realized that the next step would change everything. It was the moment when silent endurance met the inevitable revelation, and when all the power I had held quietly would finally surface. I remember the moment I spoke the words that had been waiting inside me for months. I let them out slowly, deliberately, letting each syllable carry the weight of my years of sacrifice. I revealed that I had been paying their $1,000 rent every month, that every convenience, every comfortable meal, every worry-free night they had enjoyed had come from my quiet efforts. As I said it, I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear for the confrontation, relief for finally speaking my truth. I watched Michael's face change first. The color drained from his cheeks, his usual composure faltering as he realized that the comfort he had taken for granted was built entirely on my labor and money. In that instant, the invisible thread that had tied me to his perception of me snapped, and I could see him grappling with the truth he had been avoiding. For years, he had been protected from responsibility by my generosity, and now that illusion was gone, Amanda's carefully constructed confidence began to crack as well. The smile she wore so easily, the posture that had always radiated control, faltered when she understood that I had quietly been carrying them. I could feel the tension in the room thicken, the air heavy with disbelief and shame. It was not triumph I felt, but a clear, quiet justice, the recognition that my voice mattered, and my life could no longer be erased for the sake of their comfort. In the quiet that followed, I thought back to all the meals I had stretched, all the nights I had nursed aches and pains without complaint, all the times I had cut my own needs short so they could live freely. And I realized that these months of silent sacrifice had not been in vain. They had prepared me for this moment, given me the strength to stand and deliver a truth that could no longer be ignored. I felt a curious shift within myself, a steadying of nerves I had not experienced in years. This revelation was not meant to punish or humiliate, though it would naturally carry that effect. It was a reclaiming of dignity, a boundary finally drawn with clarity. I understood that I was not being harsh. I was being just, both to them and to myself. I observed their reactions quietly, letting the weight of reality settle over them. Michael tried to explain, to justify, but I could see through the excuses, the hesitation, the fear of accountability that had allowed this imbalance to persist. Amanda looked at him with disbelief and then anger, her confidence collapsing under the truth she could not deny. I felt a quiet satisfaction, not from their discomfort, but from the clarity that the truth can bring, even when it is difficult. I let myself feel the power of that moment, the culmination of months of quiet endurance and careful planning. My heart beat steadily, my voice calm, carrying the truth I had long held close. And as I watched them grapple with it, I realized that this was not just a revelation for them, but for me. It was the moment I fully reclaimed my life, my voice, my presence. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of their expectations lift from my shoulders. I could breathe, could stand tall, could finally exist in my own space without apology. And in that silence that followed my words, I sensed the beginning of a transformation, not just for them, but for me. After the truth settled in the room, I felt an unfamiliar calm wash over me. It wasn't triumph in the way movies show it, no dramatic gestures, no harsh words thrown, but a quiet certainty that my boundaries were finally clear. I realized I had carried their lives on my back for too long, and now I could finally step back without guilt. I could see Michael's shoulders slump, a mix of shame and disbelief flickering across his face. He had been protected from responsibility for so long, and now the truth had caught up with him. I thought about all the times I had let fear of conflict guide my actions, all the meals and money and patience spent silently, hoping for gratitude that never came. And yet, I could feel the freedom of speaking my truth, of letting them face the consequences of their choices. It was strange to feel power, not as a weapon, but as a natural byproduct of honesty. I realized that being firm did not mean being cruel. It meant finally respecting myself. I remembered how many nights I had gone to bed exhausted, thinking that love meant sacrifice without acknowledgement. I understood now that love without boundaries could become a trap, a chain that keeps you small while others grow. I allowed myself to acknowledge the anger that had been simmering for months, turning it into clarity rather than bitterness. I could finally see that it was not my responsibility to carry their comfort at the expense of my own life. As I watched Michael process the revelation, I felt a shift in him too. He seemed to wrestle with guilt, with the understanding that actions, not promises, define responsibility. I could sense him reflecting on the months he had relied on me without even noticing, and I hoped that this moment might teach him more than words ever could. Amanda's face, once so confident and dismissive, now showed the faintest flicker of uncertainty, a crack in the facade she had maintained. In the quiet that followed, I realized this was the culmination of years of preparation. Every sleepless night, every penny saved, every decision to endure silently had led to this moment where honesty and boundaries converged. I felt a lightness that I hadn't known in decades. For the first time, I could breathe without the weight of unseen responsibility pressing down on me. I knew there would be tension, perhaps even resistance, in the days to come. But I also knew that the lessons I had imparted silently were now visible. I had drawn a line, not in anger, but in self-respect. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud not for them, not for their discomfort, but for the woman I had chosen to become strong, grounded, and unapologetically aware of her own worth. In that moment, I also felt a stirring of excitement for the future, a small thrill at the thought of reclaiming my own life. The truth had set me free, and I knew that this evening marked the beginning of a new chapter. As the room settled into uneasy silence, I allowed myself a quiet smile, knowing that the path forward was mine to shape. And as the night continued, I began to imagine what it would mean to live fully for myself again, to explore opportunities and joys I had long postponed. That quiet anticipation carried me forward into the next part of my journey, where personal freedom and unexpected surprises awaited, where life, at 70, could still hold adventure and love. In the days that followed, I felt a strange mix of relief and anticipation. For the first time in decades, I realized that my life didn't have to revolve around fixing everyone else's mistakes. I allowed myself to consider what I had postponed for years, the dreams, the small joys, the adventures I had thought were out of reach. When Tom, a love from my youth, reached out, it felt like the universe was giving me permission to step into a life that belonged to me alone. His voice carried warmth and familiarity, reminding me of the girl I used to be, the one who dreamed freely before life became a series of obligations. I thought carefully about what it meant to say yes, to let go of the familiar patterns of sacrifice that had defined me. I made lists, weighing the risks and the potential joy, and realized that this was not about punishing Daniel or Amanda. It was about honoring myself. I felt a thrill of courage that was entirely new, a quiet exhilaration in knowing that I could choose my own happiness without apology. Packing my bags to leave Ohio was surreal. I felt the familiar tug of nostalgia, the comfort of routines that had carried me through years of quiet endurance. Yet, there was an undeniable sense of liberation as I embraced the unknown, stepping onto the plane with a heart full of possibility. Daniel handed me a small bouquet of daisies, a reminder of the son I had raised and the growth he had finally begun to embrace. He had acknowledged his responsibility, taken steps toward independence, and in that moment, I felt hope flicker, fragile but real. Seattle welcomed me with cool, pine-scented air and a landscape that felt both foreign and exhilarating. Tom was waiting, and his presence reminded me that life could hold beauty, companionship, and laughter at any age. I stood barefoot on the Pacific coast, letting the waves wash over my sense of limitation, whispering to myself that I had made it. Every day there was a small revelation, a quiet joy in being seen, appreciated, and free to live fully. Evenings were spent sharing stories, dreams, and reflections, reconnecting with the playful, spirited woman I had been before sacrifice became a habit. I realized that happiness is not a gift to be received. It is a choice we must actively make, often in defiance of fear or expectation. Daniel called weekly, not asking for aid, but sharing progress. And I felt proud for the first time in years without the weight of resentment. Through this journey, I understood that setting boundaries does not diminish love. It nurtures it. I had given my children a chance to grow while giving myself permission to thrive. And if someone listening has ever felt unseen or taken for granted, I want them to know that it is never too late to reclaim your life. You can choose yourself. You can embrace joy, and you can step into the life you deserve, no matter your age. This moment, this chapter, was not an ending. It was a beginning, a testament to resilience, self-respect, and the power of living authentically. And in sharing my story, I hope to inspire others to recognize the strength within themselves, to set boundaries, and to allow their own light to shine. Looking back on everything, I realize that life does not have to be lived for the approval or comfort of others. Setting boundaries is not cruelty, it is an act of self-respect. I learned that love can exist without sacrifice that erases you, and that it is never too late to choose yourself. At 70, I stepped onto that plane not running from my past, but embracing a future that belonged solely to me. I allowed myself to dream again, to seek joy, and to connect with life in ways I had long postponed. I hope my story reminds anyone listening that you are never too old, too tired, or too overlooked to reclaim your voice and your freedom. The courage to stand for yourself may feel daunting at first, but it can lead to the most profound growth and fulfillment. If you have ever felt invisible, undervalued, or overwhelmed by the expectations of others, know that the power to change your life is within you. Share your story, reach for the life you deserve, and never underestimate the strength that comes from choosing yourself. And if my journey resonates with you, take a moment to like, share, and comment. I would love to hear how you are finding your own path to courage and joy.